At 4:18 p.m. local time, the Caribbean Sea looks calm, almost too calm. The wind is light, the swell is low, and visibility stretches for miles in every direction. For a U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyer on patrol in international waters, it appears to be just another ordinary watch. The kind of mission sailors record in the log, then move on from. But inside the ship, no one is treating it that way. In the information center, radar screens glow in the dim light as contacts move slowly across the display. Most of them are routine, distant commercial traffic, civilian vessels on predictable routes, and the occasional regional patrol craft keeping its distance. Then one contact begins to stand out. At first, it is nothing dramatic, a Venezuelan naval vessel. Surface contact, steady speed, parallel course. In this part of the Caribbean, shadowing is not unusual. It can happen after inspections, seizures, or any moment when regional tensions rise. Most of the time, it remains professional, most of the time. Then the numbers start to change. The Venezuelan ship alters course, not slightly, not gradually, but with clear intent. Its bow turns inward, pointing directly toward the U.S. destroyer. Moments later, its speed increases. Not normal patrol speed, not casual cruising speed, intercept speed. On the radar display, the closest point of approach begins to shrink. 4 nautical miles, 3.7, 3.2. The radar operator calls it out. The surface warfare officer confirms the vector. Around the room, voices become shorter. Small talk disappears. Precision takes over. This is no longer simple monitoring. This is a developing situation. On the bridge, binoculars come up. The Venezuelan ship is now clearly visible. Gray hull, naval configuration, crew movement on deck. This is not a civilian vessel. This is not confusion on the radar screen. And it is not drifting by accident. Standard procedure begins. The first radio call goes out over open frequencies. Unidentified Venezuelan naval vessel. This is a United States Navy vessel operating in international waters. You are closing at high speed. Alter course immediately. No answer. A second message follows, this time in Spanish. Clear, professional, exactly by the book. Still nothing. At sea, silence at close range is not neutral. It is a decision, and every decision forces another response. The U.S. destroyer does not change course. It does not speed up. It does not raise the temperature. Instead, it begins recording everything. Timestamps, bearing changes, speed shifts. Every movement is logged. The ship's SPY-1D radar continues tracking the Venezuelan vessel with exact precision. Below deck, the SLQ-32 electronic monitoring system begins capturing emissions, radar sweeps, signal patterns, anything the other ship is broadcasting. This is not about starting a confrontation. This is about making sure there is a record of every second. The closest point of approach drops below 3 nautical miles. At this distance, major incidents at sea do not begin with dramatic actions. They begin with bad judgment, a hard turn, a late correction, a moment where pride overtakes seamanship. And still, the Venezuelan ship keeps coming. No visible course correction, no radio response, no sign of deconfliction. The approach is deliberate, compressing distance and testing restraint. It is pressure without a single word being spoken. On the bridge of the U.S. destroyer, the captain studies the situation in silence. The standing instructions are clear. Systems remain at standby, but posture matters, presence matters, and the next move will shape everything that follows. This is the kind of moment that history often mislabels later. Some will call it a misunderstanding, others will call it a provocation. But sailors on watch know the difference. Courses do not change themselves. Ships do not accelerate by accident. The Venezuelan vessel is now close enough that intent can no longer be ignored. Still, the U.S. Navy does not overreact. No alarms break the calm, no dramatic turn cuts across the water, no sudden move turns a tense moment into something larger. The destroyer holds steady, because sometimes the most decisive response is not loud, it is not aggressive, and it is not what the other side expects. Then, just minutes later, the U.S. Navy makes a move the Venezuelan crew does not anticipate. A move designed not to intimidate, but to create a choice. And that is when the situation truly changes. Inside the U.S. destroyer, the atmosphere tightens, not with panic, but with focus. This is the point where routine ends and procedure takes over. In the information center, the Venezuelan vessel is no longer just a surface contact. It now has a designation, a track number, and a full data profile building line by line. Speed increasing, course converging, closest point of approach falling below accepted safety margins. Every watchstander understands what that means. At sea, distance is time, and time is the only thing that keeps miscalculation from becoming a serious incident. The surface coordinator leans closer to the display. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. Everyone in the room already understands the stakes. The ship's systems adjust quietly in the background. the SPY-1D radar tightens its tracking resolution, feeding precise vectors into the command system. Long-range cameras shift automatically, their optics locking onto the approaching Venezuelan vessel. Every second is now measured. Every movement matters, and the sea, calm only minutes before, suddenly feels much smaller. Video feeds appear across the auxiliary screens. Magnified views show the foreign vessel's bow, superstructure, and activity on deck. Crew movement is visible, not frantic, not disorganized, but deliberate. That detail matters. If this were confusion, there would be hesitation. If this were a navigational error, there would be correction. Instead, the Venezuelan ship holds its line. Steady, direct, unmistakable. Below deck, the SLQ-32 electronic monitoring suite begins flagging emissions. Low-power surface search radar. Intermittent sweeps. Nothing that confirms a direct fire control lock, but enough to show the other vessel is actively watching and measuring. The system records it all automatically. Frequencies, pulse patterns, signal strength. This is how modern confrontations often unfold, not with loud gestures, but with data. Every signal becomes part of the record. Every second leaves evidence behind. On the bridge, the officer of the deck gives the captain the latest, closest point of approach update. Under 3 nautical miles now. Still closing. No response to radio calls, no change in course. The captain gives a single nod. Maintain course and speed. That order is not stubbornness. It is discipline. Under international maritime rules, changing course too early in this situation could send the wrong message. It could appear to acknowledge pressure that the U.S. ship is not required to accept. The destroyer is operating legally, openly, and deliberately in international waters. It will not move unless safety requires it. But safety is exactly what is being tested. Inside the information center, multiple checklists are already running at once. Escalation procedures, de-escalation options, aviation readiness, communication logs, non-contact response measures. This is the quiet difference between a professional crew and an impulsive one. The Venezuelan ship continues its approach. At this range, even a sudden turn from either vessel could create dangerous wake interaction. The forces between 2 large ships moving close together are not imaginary. They can affect steering, stability, and reaction time. Everyone involved understands that, which makes the continued approach impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Another update comes in from the sensors. The Venezuelan vessel's speed has stabilized. Still high, but constant. Its heading remains unchanged. To a trained mariner, that combination sends a clear message. They want the pressure to be seen. They want the distance to shrink, but they do not want contact. The captain studies the plot one more time. He knows exactly what his ship is capable of. He also knows exactly what it does not need to do. An overreaction would hand the story to the other side. Doing absolutely nothing would invite more pressure. The answer is not force. The answer is presence. He turns slightly toward the air operations officer. Prepare the helicopter. That order does not make the ship's posture threatening. It makes it impossible to ignore. On the flight deck, sailors move with quiet speed. The MH-60 Seahawk sits folded and secured, its gray fuselage blending into the steel around it. Crews remove tie-downs and begin pre-flight checks. There is no rush, only efficiency. Every step is practiced. Every movement has a purpose. Back inside the information center, the Venezuelan track remains steady. The closest point of approach is now hovering near a threshold naval officers do not like to cross. The helicopter's systems come online. Sensors warming. Data links syncing with the ship's network. The Seahawk is not being prepared as a show of force. It is not there to intimidate. Its role is observation, awareness, and message delivery. Above deck, the rotors begin to turn. Slow at first, then faster. From the Venezuelan ship, the sound is impossible to miss. And for the first time since the encounter began, the balance of attention begins to shift. Ships can ignore radio calls. They can pretend the logs do not matter. But when a Navy helicopter lifts from the deck and moves into the airspace between 2 closing vessels, calm, steady, and recording everything, the encounter enters a new phase. And that phase demands a decision. The helicopter rises cleanly from the deck and moves forward into open air, its rotors beating a steady rhythm over the sea. From the bridge of the U.S. destroyer, the launch is routine. From the Venezuelan vessel, it is something else entirely. Because this is the moment where posturing begins to meet consequence. At sea, some lines are not printed on charts. They are not marked by borders or written into the waves. They are defined by behavior, speed, angle, silence, and intent. Every Navy understands those lines, even when no one says it out loud. And one of those lines is simple. You do not close fast on a naval vessel and ignore repeated calls unless you expect a response. The MH-60 Seahawk does not rush toward the Venezuelan ship. It does not fly low. It does not make any dramatic move. Instead, it takes a measured position, offset, elevated, and clearly visible. Its sensors begin feeding real-time imagery back to the destroyer. Infrared, optical zoom, precision range-finding. Every movement on the Venezuelan deck is now being captured, time-stamped, and archived. This is not intimidation, it is documentation. Inside the information center, the atmosphere shifts again. The Venezuelan ship's radar emissions rise slightly. Still not a direct targeting mode, still not a confirmed lock, but it is no longer passive either. The SLQ-32 flags it immediately. Data scrolls across the screen. Frequency, strength, duration. They are tracking the helicopter now. That matters. Tracking by itself does not cross the line. But when it is combined with a close approach, unanswered radio calls, and a steady converging course, it pushes the encounter closer to a threshold professional navies are trained to avoid. This is how dangerous moments at sea begin. Not always with a clear decision, but with too many signals stacking on top of each other at once. On the bridge, the captain watches both pictures, the surface plot and the air track. The Venezuelan ship is still on a converging course, but its speed has stopped increasing. The change is subtle, almost invisible to anyone untrained, but to the crew watching the display, it stands out immediately. The pressure is being felt. This is the essence of modern naval confrontation. No dramatic display, no sudden move, just measured presence, applied in the right place at the right time. The helicopter begins a slow lateral pass, remaining safely within international airspace. A bright visual marker appears briefly across the Venezuelan ship's superstructure, then settles near the bridge. It is impossible to ignore. On the Venezuelan deck, sailors pause. A few look up, others move toward the rear of the ship. Through the Seahawk's camera, their body language becomes readable. This is not panic, but it is no longer confidence either. Then, for the first time since the encounter began, something changes. The Venezuelan ship adjusts its helm. Not a dramatic turn, just a few degrees. But it is enough. Enough to widen the closest point of approach. Enough to signal reconsideration. Moments later, its speed begins to fall, slowly, deliberately, as if the crew wants the change to appear voluntary. Inside the information center, the numbers confirm what everyone can already sense. Closest point of approach increasing. Relative bearing stabilizing. Closure rate decreasing. The line has been approached, but it has not been crossed. The helicopter holds position a little longer, still recording. No warning gestures, no dramatic radio exchange, no unnecessary movement. The message has already been delivered. We see you, we have recorded this. And we are ready to respond further if the situation requires it. Finally, a radio transmission breaks the silence. Not an apology, not a withdrawal, just words, a claim of sovereign patrol, a request for the U.S. ship to adjust course. Carefully phrased, politically familiar, but the most important part is not what they say. It is that they are finally communicating. The destroyer answers immediately, calm and precise. This is a United States Navy vessel conducting lawful transit in international waters. Your unsafe maneuvering has been recorded. No escalation, no emotional language, just facts. The helicopter begins to pull away, climbing gently and turning back toward the destroyer. The Venezuelan ship continues to slow. Its bow is now clearly offset from the U.S. vessel's track. The encounter begins to unwind as carefully as it formed. No one cheers. No one relaxes yet, because everyone on both ships understands what just happened. This was not about winning a confrontation. It was about defining a boundary. The Venezuelan Navy tested how close it could come without consequence. The U.S. Navy answered without a single dramatic move, but with absolute clarity. At sea, that is often the strongest message of all, and next time, the distance to that line may be even shorter. From the Venezuelan ship, the moment feels different. Until now, the encounter has been steel against steel. Hulls cutting through water, numbers shifting across radar screens, silence carrying most of the weight. But when the helicopter settles into position and a bright marker touches the bridge windows, the situation becomes personal. This is no longer an abstract game of bearings and speed. This is eye contact. Through the Seahawk's forward camera, faces come into view. Helmets, binoculars. A hand raised briefly, then lowered. The image is sharp enough to catch the moment hesitation replaces confidence. The helicopter's presence closes distance in a way ships never can. And that is exactly the point. On board the U.S. destroyer, the information center watches the feed in real time. The aircrew says very little. They do not need to. Every frame is already telling the story. Every second of video is time-stamped, geolocated, and mirrored to backup storage. This is no longer just a record of position. It is a record of behavior. Below the helicopter, the Venezuelan ship's wake begins to shorten. At first, the change is almost invisible, the kind of detail most people would miss. But trained sailors notice immediately. The speed drops by 1 knot, then another. The bow angle opens by a fraction. The once tight intercept line begins to loosen. This is the critical moment. If the Venezuelan crew changes its mind again, accelerates, closes the distance, and ignores the helicopter, the situation could move into a far more serious phase. At this range, there is little room for error and even less room for diplomacy. But that is not what happens. Instead, the Venezuelan ship steadies. The aggressive geometry fades. The closest point of approach widens enough to return the situation to a safer margin, even if pride still demands proximity. Then the radio crackles to life. United States naval vessel, we are conducting sovereign patrol operations in the vicinity of Venezuelan waters. It is a carefully constructed sentence, not an apology, not an admission, but it is also not silence. And in maritime confrontations, communication itself is a concession. The U.S. response comes immediately. This is a United States Navy vessel conducting lawful transit in international waters. Your unsafe maneuvers have been recorded. No threats, no demands, just a statement of fact. The helicopter remains in position for one more long, quiet orbit. The camera stays locked. The visual marker does not return. There is no need for it now. The message has already landed. On the Venezuelan deck, crew members begin drifting back from the forward mount. One sailor raises both hands briefly, palms outward. A universal signal at sea. Not surrender, acknowledgement. Finally, the helicopter turns away. Its climb is smooth and unhurried. No dramatic pull-up, no aggressive banking. Just a controlled arc back toward the destroyer, the sound of its rotors fading into the wider hum of the sea. As it departs, the Venezuelan ship holds its reduced speed and altered course. The encounter is effectively over. On the U.S. destroyer, the Seahawk touches down and is secured without ceremony. The deck crew moves efficiently, already shifting the ship back toward normal operations. Inside the information center, the logs are finalized. Video files are cataloged. Sensor data is archived. The entire interaction from the first course change to the final radio call is now preserved in exact detail. This is how modern naval power asserts itself. Not through dramatic displays, not through loud warnings, but through discipline, documentation, and the ability to apply pressure without losing control. From the outside, some might mistake restraint for weakness, but navies do not measure strength by noise. They measure it by outcomes. And in this encounter, only one side changed course. The Venezuelan ship remains visible on radar, now well clear of any unsafe approach. It does not fully leave the area, but it does not renew the challenge either. It simply holds position at a distance that respects reality. And in its own way, that is the result. Because the objective was never to dominate the water that afternoon. It was to show that escalation is optional, and that the side with better control decides when it ends. No shots fired, no damage sustained, no headlines yet. But the lesson has been delivered quietly, unmistakably, and in full view of every sensor watching the Caribbean that day. And for anyone else considering a similar move, the message is already written in the logs. The U.S. Navy does not need to chase. It only needs to remain steady, watch, and record. By the time the helicopter is secured and the flight deck returns to silence, the Caribbean looks exactly as it did before the encounter began. The same calm water, the same wide horizon, the same deceptive peace. But nothing about the situation is truly the same. Inside the U.S. destroyer, the work continues long after the Venezuelan ship has moved to a safer distance. This is the part the public rarely sees. No dramatic footage, no urgent radio calls. Just professionals doing the work that modern naval power actually depends on. Logs are reviewed, sensor data is cross-checked, video timelines are synchronized down to the second. Every bearing change, every speed adjustment, every moment of radio silence, every word spoken once that silence finally broke. All of it becomes part of the official record. Not for headlines, for history, for law, for the next encounter. Because at sea, there is always a next encounter. The Venezuelan ship remains on radar for hours, holding a parallel course at a respectful distance. It does not attempt another approach. It does not challenge the airspace again. Whatever message it intended to send has already been answered. Not with force, but with control. And that is the point most people miss. This was never about who had the larger weapons or the faster ship. The outcome was decided long before anything could be brought to bear. It was decided by discipline, by restraint, and by a deep understanding of how escalation really works at sea. Venezuela moved in fast, betting that distance alone could create leverage. The goal was simple: force a tense moment and maybe force a reaction. But instead, it created something far more costly for them. Visibility. Every assertive move was captured. Every unsafe maneuver was documented. Every claim of sovereign patrol now sits beside time-stamped evidence showing exactly how the encounter unfolded. In the modern maritime world, evidence is power. If the US ship had reacted too strongly, the story could have changed instantly. If it had altered course first, the message would have been read very differently across the region. But by holding course, launching the helicopter, and forcing communication without escalating the situation, the US Navy controlled both the encounter and the narrative that followed. This is how gray zone confrontations are decided. Not by crossing the line, but by making the other side step back from it. For the Venezuelan Navy, the lesson is quiet but clear. Close and assertive approaches do not always produce concessions. Sometimes they invite scrutiny. And scrutiny is something smaller navies cannot afford when operating under the eyes of international law. For the US Navy, the lesson was reinforced. Presence works. Documentation works. And restraint, when backed by overwhelming capability, is not weakness. It is leverage. No medals are awarded for moments like this. No major press conference follows. Sailors finish their watch, complete the log, and move on. That is exactly how it is supposed to happen. But somewhere else, in briefing rooms, intelligence centers, and foreign naval headquarters, this interaction will be studied frame by frame. The angles, the timing, the response, the exact moment when pressure met discipline and discipline held. Because next time, the ship may be different, the sea may be rougher, the margin for error may be thinner, and the same question will return. How close is too close? How fast is too fast? And what happens when restraint is mistaken for hesitation? That question is not theoretical. It is being tested again and again in waters like these. So here's the real takeaway. This encounter did not end simply because one side had more power. It ended because one side stayed in control. And in modern naval standoffs, control is everything. Now we want to hear from you. If you were on the bridge of that destroyer, watching a foreign warship close in, ignore your calls and test your resolve. Would you have held course? Or would you have responded more firmly? Drop your take in the comments. Because the next time this happens, and sooner or later it will, the answer will not just shape a discussion online. It could shape what happens out on the water.